The Arizona Territory, 1883, a land of merciless sun and shadow where the line between life and death was drawn in sand and settled in blood. For three sisters, it would become the crucible that forged them into something stronger than steel and more enduring than the mountains themselves. Picture it, Rebecca, Hannah, and Emily, three women betrayed by the very men who had sworn to protect them, abandoned to the punishing desert with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a desperate will to survive. They thought their story would end there, whispered away by the desert wind like so many others before them. They were wrong. The Apache were watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wagon creaked beneath them as they made their way across the parched landscape. Rebecca sat with her back straight, eyes fixed on the horizon where the Dragoon Mountains cut jagged lines against the sky. The land around them was harsh, all dust and scrub brush and rocks that seemed to collect the day's heat only to radiate it back long after sunset. 5 months they'd been traveling, chasing her husband Frank's promises of silver and prosperity in the Arizona Territory. 5 months of broken axles and dwindling supplies. 5 months of Frank's moods growing darker with each passing mile. Rebecca touched her cheek, the bruise hidden beneath a thin layer of powder. It wasn't the first, it wouldn't be the last. But she had stopped crying about it long ago. Tears were a luxury in a place where water itself was precious. Becca. Hannah's voice was soft as she settled beside her on the wagon seat. Her sister's eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but there was something else there too, a wariness that had grown sharper since Nathaniel had struck her 2 nights before. Not a slap, but a closed fist that had sent her sprawling into the dust. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew. Hannah never complained, never questioned. That was Emily's territory. "I overheard them talking," Hannah whispered, her gaze darting toward where the men had gathered near the fire, heads bent in conversation. Frank and Nate. Sam, too. Rebecca's fingers tightened on the reins. "What did they say?" Hannah hesitated, her breath catching. "Becca, they're planning something bad." A chill settled in Rebecca's stomach despite the oppressive heat. She had noticed the way Frank had been eyeing the supplies, taking inventory with calculating eyes. The way Nate had been testing the horses, checking their strength. The way Sam had stopped looking at Emily altogether, as if she'd already vanished from his sight. "How bad?" Rebecca asked, keeping her voice steady. "They think we're slowing them down, that we'll never make it to Silverton with the supplies running so low." Hannah's voice dropped even lower. "Frank said 3 fewer mouths to feed would double their chances." Rebecca swallowed hard, looking toward the fire where her husband sat, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the flames, the smoke from his pipe rising like a ghost in the twilight. She had married him because he was strong, because she believed his promises of a better life out west. Now she understood that his strength was merely brutality, dressed in fine clothes, and his promises were as empty as the desert around them. "What do we do?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible. Rebecca didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to where Emily slept in the back of the wagon, her face young even at 22, still holding traces of the girl who had believed in love stories. Sam had courted her with poetry and sweet words, painting dreams of a life in the West, where they would build something beautiful together. Now Emily rarely spoke, the light in her eyes dimming with each passing day. "We need to listen," Rebecca finally said. "We need to be sure." That night, as the campfire burned low and the desert breathed around them, Rebecca kept herself awake, counting the stars that wheeled overhead in their thousands. When the men's voices dropped to murmurs, she slipped from her bedroll, nudging Hannah awake. Together they crept toward Emily, rousing her with gentle hands. "What?" Emily started, but Rebecca pressed a finger to her lips. "Listen," she whispered. leading her sisters toward the shadows where the men's voices carried on the night air. "We've got maybe 3 days of supplies left," Frank was saying, his voice low but clear in the stillness. "We'll never make it to Silverton with them weighing us down." "Emily's my wife," Sam protested weakly. "I can't just—" "She'll get you killed," Nate cut in, his voice hard and unyielding. "They all will. Women aren't made for this country." Rebecca felt Emily stiffen. Beside her, a small gasp escaping her lips. Hannah's fingers dug into Rebecca's arm, trembling. "So what do you propose?" Sam asked, his protest already fading. "We leave tonight," Frank said, and there was no emotion in his voice. "We take the horses, the wagon, the supplies. We head for Silverton, make our claim. By the time anyone finds them, if anyone finds them, we'll be rich men." "But they'll die out here," Sam said, though there was no real objection in his tone. "That's not our problem anymore," Frank replied coldly. "This is about survival now." Emily made a strangled sound, and Rebecca clamped a hand over her sister's mouth, pulling her back into the darkness. Hannah was shaking, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror. "They're going to leave us," she whispered, "out here, to die." Rebecca's mind raced. They had no weapons, no horses of their own, no way to outrun the men if they tried to flee. The nearest settlement was days away on foot, through country that had killed hardier souls than theirs. And even if they managed to reach help, what then? In this wild territory, a husband's word was law. Who would believe 3 women claiming abandonment? "We need to take supplies," Rebecca whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Food, water, anything we can hide away before they leave." "And go where?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "There's nothing out there but desert and Apaches." Rebecca met her sister's gaze steadily. "Better to die trying than wait for it to take us." They moved silently back to their bedrolls, each lost in her own thoughts. Rebecca lay awake, listening to the night sounds, the crackle of the dying fire, the soft nickering of the horses, the whisper of the wind through the scrub brush. She had no illusions about what awaited them if they were left behind. Death would come, slow and agonizing beneath the merciless sun. She must have dozed, because the sound of movement jerked her awake. The moon had set, and the world was black as pitch. She could just make out the silhouettes of the men moving about the camp, their voices low murmurs as they prepared the horses. "Now!" she hissed, shaking Hannah and Emily awake. "They're leaving now." They scrambled from their bedrolls, but it was too late. Frank's hand closed around Rebecca's wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his teeth gleaming in the darkness. "Frank, please!" Rebecca gasped, trying to pull away. "You can't do this." "Can't I?" He shoved her backward, and she stumbled, falling hard onto the rocky ground. "A man does what he has to out here." Hannah screamed as Nate grabbed her, his fingers digging into her arms. Emily was sobbing, pleading with Sam, but he wouldn't meet her eyes, his face turned away in shame, but not regret. "You'll die out here," Rebecca said, pushing herself up, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. "Is that what you want? To be murderers?" Frank laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "No one murders a woman by leaving her. She just fails to survive. There's a difference." He turned to the others. "Let's go. Dawn's coming soon." Rebecca lunged for him, driven by a fury she hadn't known she possessed, but Frank was ready. His fist connected with her temple, and the world exploded into stars and darkness. She fell, pain radiating through her skull, the taste of dirt and blood filling her mouth. Through blurred vision, she saw Hannah struggling against Nate, saw Emily collapsed on her knees, her pleas falling on deaf ears, as Sam mounted his horse without looking back. The wagon groaned as it pulled away, wheels cutting deep into the earth. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving only the wind and the vast, empty silence of the desert. Rebecca pushed herself up, her head throbbing with each heartbeat. Hannah was beside her, helping her sit. "They're gone," Hannah whispered, her voice hollow. "They really left us." Emily sat in the dirt, her eyes fixed on the direction the wagon had disappeared, as if waiting for Sam to return. To tell her it had all been a terrible mistake. But there was only the empty trail stretching into darkness. "We need to take stock," Rebecca said, forcing strength into her voice. "See what they left us." It wasn't much. A canteen with perhaps a day's worth of water. A small bundle of jerky that Emily had hidden in her skirts. A single blanket, no weapons, no tools, nothing to help them navigate or defend themselves. "We'll die out here," Emily said, her voice flat and emotionless, just like they wanted. Rebecca looked at her sisters, Hannah with her quiet strength, now pushed to the breaking point, Emily with her shattered dreams. Then she turned to the vast darkness around them, to the land that had birthed stories of lost travelers found years later, nothing but bleached bones and tattered cloth. "No," she said, and there was steel in her voice. "We won't. We're going to survive." The dawn broke over the desert, painting the landscape in bruised purples and golds. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The air was cool, but Rebecca knew it wouldn't last. Soon the sun would climb higher, turning the world into a furnace that would sap their strength and cloud their minds. "We need to move," she said, gathering their meager supplies. "Find shade, conserve water. When it's cooler, we'll try to make for the mountains." Hannah nodded, helping Emily to her feet. They stood together for a moment, 3 women alone in a wilderness that had broken stronger souls, and then they began to walk. The sun climbed higher, its heat pressing down on them like a physical weight. Their progress was slow, each step an effort against the loose sand and rocky terrain. Rebecca kept them moving toward the mountains, though they seemed no closer no matter how far they walked. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Emily stumbled, nearly falling, and Hannah caught her, her own steps faltering. "We need to rest," Hannah said, her voice hoarse from thirst. Rebecca scanned their surroundings, desperate for any shelter from the sun. There, a cluster of boulders that cast a small patch of shade. They staggered toward it, collapsing in the relative coolness. Emily leaned against the rock, her face flushed, her breathing shallow. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't go any further." Rebecca passed her the canteen, watching as Emily took a small sip, the water precious beyond measure. "You can," she said firmly. "We all can. We just need to be smart, rest when it's hot, walk when it's cool." Hannah wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dust across her forehead. "Even if we reach the mountains, then what? We don't know this country. We don't know where to find water or food or help." Rebecca had no answer for that. The truth was, their chances were slim at best, but she refused to surrender to despair, refused to fulfill Frank's prediction that they would simply fail to survive. "One step at a time," she said. "That's all we can do." They rested until the worst of the heat had passed, sharing the water in tiny sips that did little to quench their thirst. When the shadows began to lengthen, they continued their journey, each step a battle against exhaustion and the growing knowledge that they were walking into emptiness. The second day was worse. The water ran out by noon, and their throats became parched, their lips cracked and bleeding in the dry air. Emily began to hallucinate, speaking to Sam as if he walked beside her. Hannah grew silent, conserving her energy, her eyes fixed on the ground before her. Rebecca pushed them onward, though her own strength was failing. The mountains seemed no closer than they had yesterday, and she began to wonder if they were walking in circles, if the desert itself was playing cruel tricks on them. By the third day, they could barely move. They huddled in the scant shade of a mesquite tree, too weak to continue. Emily lay with her head in Hannah's lap, her breathing shallow, her eyes closed. Hannah stroked her hair, her own face gaunt with dehydration and exhaustion. "It's all right," Hannah whispered, though whether to Emily or herself, Rebecca couldn't tell. "It's all right." Rebecca stared at the horizon, where heat waves shimmered and danced. Was that movement? Riders, perhaps? She blinked, trying to clear her vision. No, it was just another mirage, another cruel joke of the desert. Except the movement continued, growing more distinct. Not a mirage. People, on horseback. "Hannah," she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Look!" Hannah raised her head, following Rebecca's gaze. "Who?" The riders drew closer, their forms becoming clearer against the harsh landscape. 3 men, their hair long and black, their bodies adorned with buckskin and beads. Apache. Rebecca had heard stories. Everyone had. Stories of raids and violence, of settlers found scalped and mutilated. But she had also heard other stories, whispered by those who knew the land better. Stories of honor and skill, of a people fighting to protect what was theirs. Either way, it didn't matter now. They had no strength to run, no means to defend themselves. Their fate rested in the hands of these approaching strangers. The Apache. Warriors slowed as they neared, their horses snorting in the heat. The leader was tall and lean, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes sharp as they assessed the 3 women. The second man was older, lines etched deep into his face, his bearing dignified and calm. The third was younger, his features set in a wary scowl. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rebecca tried to stand, to face whatever came with dignity, but her legs betrayed her, and she remained seated in the dust. "Please," she said, her voice a rasp, "help us." The leader dismounted, moving with a fluid grace that belied the harshness of the land. He approached slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. His eyes took in their cracked lips, their sunburned skin, the desperation etched into their faces. He spoke, the words unfamiliar to Rebecca's ears. She shook her head, not understanding. "Water," she managed. "Please." The leader considered her for a moment, then reached for the water skin at his hip. He tossed it to her, and she caught it with trembling hands. The others watched as she opened it, taking a small sip before passing it to Hannah, who helped Emily drink. The leader spoke again, this time to his companions. The older man nodded, his expression thoughtful. The younger one frowned, shaking, his head in clear disagreement. Rebecca watched the exchange, trying to read their intentions in their faces. Would they leave them here to die, kill them where they sat? Or was there another possibility, one she hardly dared hope for? The leader turned back to her, pointing to his horse, then to them. The meaning was clear enough. "You'll help us?" Rebecca asked, hardly believing it. The leader didn't respond, but he moved toward his horse, gesturing for them to follow. The older man dismounted, approaching Hannah and Emily with careful movements. He helped Emily to her feet, supporting her with unexpected gentleness. The younger warrior remained on his horse, his displeasure evident, but he made no move to stop what was happening. Rebecca looked up at the leader, trying to convey her gratitude with her eyes, since words failed her. He gave a single nod, then reached down, offering his hand. She took it, his grip strong and sure as he pulled her up behind him on the horse. As they rode away from the place that had nearly become their grave, Rebecca looked back at the empty desert. Somewhere out there, Frank and the others were heading towards Silverton, believing they had left their wives to certain death. They were wrong. The desert had not claimed them, and Rebecca had a feeling that this was just the beginning of a journey none of them could have imagined. The horses moved with practiced ease across the unforgiving terrain, their hooves finding purchase on ground that seemed to shift and give way beneath them. Rebecca clung to the leader's back, her fingers gripping the rough leather of his vest. Each breath she took burned in her parched throat, but she was alive. They were all alive. She glanced over her shoulder, searching for her sisters. Hannah rode with the older warrior, her posture stiff but steady. Emily lay draped across the younger man's horse, too weak to sit upright, her face hidden by the curtain of her hair. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in deep oranges and purples. The air cooled incrementally, bringing blessed relief after the scorching day. Rebecca tried to make sense of their direction, but the landscape offered few landmarks, and her mind still swam with exhaustion and thirst. "Where?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper against the leader's back. He half turned, studying her with eyes that missed nothing. "Agua," he said, one of the few Spanish words Rebecca recognized. Water. They rode for what felt like hours, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Rebecca into a strange half-consciousness. Images flickered behind her closed eyelids. Frank's face twisted in disdain, the empty desert stretching endlessly, the distant mountains that never seemed to draw closer. She jerked awake when the horse stopped, nearly sliding from its back before the leader steadied her with a firm hand. They had reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side. A trickle of water wound its way through the rocks, forming a small pool at the base of the cliff. The sight of it made Rebecca's throat constrict with desperate need. The leader dismounted in one fluid motion, then helped Rebecca down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she would have fallen if not for his grip on her arms. He guided her to the water's edge, where Hannah was already helping Emily drink, cupping the precious liquid in her hands and bringing it to her sister's cracked lips. Rebecca knelt beside them, plunging her hands into the cool water and drinking deeply. It tasted of minerals and earth, sweeter than any wine she had ever known. She splashed some on her face, washing away days of dust and despair, then drank again, forcing herself to go slowly despite the urge to gulp it down. The Apache warriors watched them with expressions ranging from stoic assessment to barely concealed suspicion. The leader spoke quietly to the others, gesturing toward the canyon entrance, and the younger warrior nodded, mounting his horse and riding back the way they had come. Standing guard, Rebecca realized. As her desperate thirst eased, other sensations returned. The gnawing hunger in her belly, the bone-deep weariness, the fear of what might come next. These men had saved them from dying of thirst, but that didn't mean they were safe. Far from it. The older warrior approached, carrying something wrapped in leather. He crouched near them, unwrapping the package to reveal strips of dried meat. He offered it to them with a nod. "Thank you," Hannah whispered, accepting the food with trembling hands. They ate slowly, savoring each bite. The meat was tough and heavily salted, but to Rebecca, it tasted of life itself. Emily managed only a few bites before closing her eyes, her head resting against Hannah's shoulder. "She needs rest," Hannah said, looking up at Rebecca with worry etched into her features. "We all do." Rebecca nodded, turning to the leader, who stood a few paces away, scanning the canyon walls. "My sister," she said, gesturing to Emily. "She's very weak." The leader studied Emily for a long moment, then spoke to the older warrior. Together, they gathered branches and scrub brush, arranging them into a makeshift shelter against the canyon wall. The older man spread a blanket beneath it, then gestured for them to bring Emily. Hannah and Rebecca half carried their sister to the shelter, laying her gently on the blanket. Emily's skin burned with fever, her breathing shallow. Rebecca placed a damp cloth on her forehead, smoothing back her tangled hair. "Will she be all right?" Hannah asked, her voice small in the gathering darkness. Rebecca wished she could offer comfort, but she wouldn't lie. "I don't know," she admitted. "The desert takes its toll." The leader appeared beside them, crouching to examine Emily. His face revealed nothing as he placed a hand on her forehead, checking her pulse at her wrist. He spoke a single word, pointing to Emily, then to his eyes. "I think he wants us to watch her," Rebecca said, "to let him know if she gets worse." Hannah nodded, settling beside Emily. "I'll stay with her." Rebecca stepped out of the shelter, her legs still unsteady. The leader stood nearby, his posture relaxed yet alert. The older warrior was tending a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. "Thank you," Rebecca said, meeting the leader's gaze directly, "for helping us." He regarded her silently, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then he pointed to himself. "Naiche," he said. "Naiche," Rebecca repeated. She pressed a hand to her chest. "Rebecca." She gestured toward the shelter. "Hannah. Emily." Naiche nodded once, accepting this exchange of names. He pointed to the older warrior. "Daklugi." "Daklugi," Rebecca acknowledged with a small nod. Naiche gestured toward the canyon entrance, where the younger warrior had disappeared. "Taza." Names were exchanged, but trust was another matter entirely. Rebecca knew the stories settlers told about the Apache, tales of savagery and bloodshed. But she also knew the stories the Apache might tell about people like her husband, tales of broken promises, stolen land, and slaughtered families. In this moment, she couldn't afford to dwell on either narrative. These men had saved them when they were at the edge of death. That would have to be enough for now. Exhaustion washed over her in a sudden wave, and she swayed on her feet. Naiche gestured toward the shelter where her sisters rested, his meaning clear: sleep. Rebecca nodded gratefully and made her way back to Hannah and Emily. She settled beside them, pulling the edge of the blanket over her legs. Hannah was already asleep, one arm protectively around Emily, whose breathing seemed slightly steadier now. Rebecca closed her eyes, expecting sleep to claim her instantly. Instead, her mind raced with questions. What would happen when morning came? Would these men lead them to safety, to some settlement where they might find help? Or did they have other plans? And what of Frank and the others? Had they reached Silverton by now, already spinning tales of how their wives had met some tragic fate? The thought of Frank sent a spike of anger through her so intense it made her gasp. She had trusted him once, had built her life around his promises. Now she understood the hollowness of those promises, the cruelty that had always lurked beneath his charm. If she survived this, if they all survived, she would never again place her fate in the hands of a man who saw her as disposable. The fire crackled outside, and the soft murmur of voices drifted to her, Naiche and Daklugie, speaking in their own language, the words foreign, but the cadence somehow soothing. Rebecca listened until the sounds blended together, carrying her into a dreamless sleep. She woke to the soft glow of dawn, filtering through the canyon. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, reaching instinctively for familiar surroundings. Then reality crashed back, the abandonment, the desperate trek through the desert, the Apache warriors who had found them when all hope seemed lost. Emily stirred beside her, her eyes fluttering open. "Water," she whispered. Rebecca helped her sister sit up, relieved to see the clarity in her eyes. The fever had broken sometime in the night. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been dragged behind a wagon for 3 days, Emily said, a ghost of her old humor surfacing. "But I'm alive. We all are." Hannah was already awake, checking Emily's temperature with the back of her hand. "The fever's gone," she said, relief evident in her voice. Rebecca stepped out of the shelter, blinking in the early light. Naiche and Daklugi were already moving about the camp, preparing the horses. Taza had returned sometime during the night and was now crouched by the remnants of the fire, his expression guarded as he watched Rebecca emerge. Naiche approached, carrying a water skin and another package of dried meat. He offered them to Rebecca with a nod. "Thank you." she said, accepting them gratefully. Naiche gestured toward the horses, then to the horizon. They would be leaving soon. Rebecca hesitated. "Where are you taking us?" she asked, knowing he likely wouldn't understand. Naiche seemed to grasp her concern. He pointed toward the mountains, making a motion with his hands that suggested a camp or settlement. Rebecca nodded, though uncertainty still churned in her stomach. She had no choice but to trust these strangers, at least for now. The alternative was certain death in the desert. She brought the food and water back to her sisters, helping Emily to her feet. The younger woman was still weak, but the night's rest and water had worked wonders. Hannah supported her as they made their way to the horses. Taza approached, his movements wary. He spoke to Naiche, gesturing toward the women with what seemed like concern or disagreement. Naiche responded calmly but firmly, and Taza fell silent, though his eyes remained troubled. "I don't think he wants us to come with them," Hannah whispered. "Can you blame him?" Emily asked, her voice still raspy. "We're nothing but trouble." Rebecca didn't respond. She knew Emily was right. They were a burden. 3 white women in a territory where tensions between settlers and Apache ran deep. But she also knew they had no other options. Naiche mounted his horse, then reached down to help Rebecca up behind him. Daklugi did the same for Hannah. Emily, stronger now but still unsteady, was assisted onto Taza's horse. The young warrior didn't look pleased, but he made no protest as they set off. They rode through the day, following trails invisible to Rebecca's eyes. The landscape changed gradually, the barren desert giving way to scrubland, dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and drink, then continued on as the sun began its westward descent. By late afternoon, they had reached the foothills of the mountains Rebecca had seen from a distance. The air was cooler here, the vegetation more abundant. Small game darted through the underbrush, rabbits and quail that made Rebecca's stomach clench. With hunger, Taza rode ahead suddenly, disappearing around a bend in the trail. When they followed, Rebecca saw why. A scout had been waiting, another Apache warrior who conversed rapidly with Naiche, his eyes continually darting to the women. Naiche remained impassive, his responses measured. Finally, the scout nodded and turned his horse, leading them deeper into the foothills. "What do you think they're saying?" Hannah asked quietly. "Nothing good, I'd wager," Rebecca replied. She could feel the tension radiating from Naiche's back, a new alertness in his posture. They rounded a steep hillside, and Rebecca caught her breath. Nestled in a protected valley was an Apache encampment, dozens of wickiups, the dome-shaped dwellings covered in brush and hides, arranged in a rough circle. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played between the structures, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Women worked at various tasks, grinding corn, tanning hides, weaving baskets. All activity ceased as they approached. Faces turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. A group of warriors moved to intercept them, their stance wary, hands never far from their weapons. Naiche raised a hand in greeting, speaking in a clear, commanding voice. The other warriors responded, their eyes never leaving the 3 white women. Rebecca felt her sisters draw closer to her, their fear palpable. An older man stepped forward from the gathering crowd. His hair was streaked with gray, his face deeply lined, but his bearing was that of a leader. He wore a headband adorned with intricate beadwork, and his gaze was sharp as he assessed the newcomers. Naiche dismounted, approaching the older man with evident respect. They spoke for several minutes, Naiche gesturing occasionally toward Rebecca and her sisters. The older man listened, his expression giving nothing away, then asked several questions that made Naiche nod solemnly. Finally, the older man approached the horses where the sisters still sat, uncertain whether to dismount. He studied each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on Rebecca. "You are far from your people," he said in heavily accented but understandable English. Rebecca blinked in surprise. "You speak English?" "Some," he acknowledged. "Why are you in our lands? Where are your men?" Rebecca glanced at her sisters, then back to the older man. "Our husbands abandoned us," she said simply, "left us to die in the desert." The older man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or contempt for men who would do such a thing. "Nietzsche says you were dying when he found you." Rebecca nodded. "We would have been dead by sunset if your warriors hadn't helped us." The older man was silent for a long moment, considering. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. "I am Mako," he finally said. "My people have suffered much at the hands of the white man. Many would say we should send you away." He paused, his gaze moving from Rebecca to Hannah to Emily. "But we do not war with women left to die by their own kind. You may stay until you are strong enough to leave." Relief washed over Rebecca, so profound she nearly swayed in the saddle. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate for the gift they had been given. Marco nodded once, then turned to speak to several women who had gathered nearby. They approached, helping the sisters dismount, their hands gentle but their expressions guarded. One woman, older than the rest, with silver threaded through her black hair and eyes that missed nothing, took charge. She directed the others to lead the sisters to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp, slightly separate from the rest. "Lozan," she said, pointing to herself as they walked. "Medicine woman." "Rebecca," she responded, then introduced her sisters. "Thank you for helping us." Lozan nodded, her face softening slightly. "Rest now. Eat. Tomorrow is another day." The wickiup was small but clean, with woven mats covering the earthen floor and soft hides for bedding. A small fire burned in the center, smoke rising through a hole in the roof. Lozan brought them a pot of stew, rich with meat and unfamiliar, roots that made Rebecca's mouth water, and flat bread still warm from the cooking fire. They ate gratefully, savoring each bite of the first real meal they'd had in days. Emily's color improved with every spoonful, and Hannah's shoulders gradually relaxed as the warmth of the food and fire seeped into her bones. When they had finished eating, Lozan returned with clean clothes, simple deerskin dresses and soft moccasins. She gestured for them to change, taking their dirty, torn dresses away without comment. "I can't believe we're here," Hannah said when they were alone, running her fingers over the soft leather of her new garment. "Yesterday I thought we would die in the desert." "And today we're guests of the Apache," Emily added, a hint of wonder in her voice. "Sam always said they were savages, but they've shown more kindness than our own husbands." Rebecca didn't respond immediately. She was thinking of Mako's words, "Until you are strong enough to leave." He had made it clear their welcome was temporary, a courtesy extended to those in need, but not meant to last. "We're alive," she finally said. "That's what matters for now. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." But as she settled onto the soft hides, listening to her sisters breathing slow into sleep, Rebecca couldn't help but wonder, what did come next? They had no money, no possessions, no way to reach civilization. Even if they could find their way to Silverton or another settlement, what awaited them there? Destitution, suspicion, or worse, their husbands, who might not be pleased to find them alive after all. No, she couldn't think about that now. For the moment, they were safe, sheltered, fed. It would have to be enough. Sleep claimed her quickly, but her dreams were troubled. Visions of Frank's face twisted in anger, of endless desert, of hands reaching for her with unknown intentions. She woke with a start, heart pounding, to find the first light of dawn filtering through the wickiup's entrance. Hannah and Emily still slept, their faces peaceful for the first time in days. Rebecca rose quietly, slipping outside into the cool morning air. The camp was already stirring, women tending fires, children fetching water, men preparing for the day's hunting or scouting. She felt eyes on her, curious and wary, but no one approached. She stood awkwardly, unsure of her place. In this unfamiliar world, a familiar figure appeared at her side, Lozan, carrying a basket and gesturing for Rebecca to follow. She led her to a fire where several women worked at various tasks, grinding corn, weaving baskets, preparing hides. They looked up as Rebecca approached, their expressions guarded but not hostile. Lozan handed her the basket and pointed to a pile of berries that needed sorting. The message was clear: if you stay, you work. Rebecca nodded, settling cross-legged beside the other women. The task was simple enough, separating ripe berries from those that were overripe or underripe. The repetitive motion was soothing, allowing her mind to settle after the turmoil of the past days. The women worked in silence at first, occasionally speaking to each other in their language, but not addressing Rebecca directly. She didn't mind. The quiet was a blessing after so much fear and uncertainty. After a while, one of the younger women, barely more than a girl, edged closer. She pointed to Rebecca's hair, saying something in Apache. Lozan translated, her English halting but clear enough. She asks why your hair is the color of autumn leaves. Rebecca touched her auburn hair, surprised by the question. I was born this way, she said. My mother had the same color. The girl nodded, fascinated. She reached out hesitantly, then drew back, unsure. It's all right, Rebecca said, bowing, her head slightly. The girl touched her hair gently, then smiled, saying something to the others that made them laugh. The tension eased a fraction, and the women returned to their work with slightly more relaxed postures. Hannah and Emily joined them later, guided by a young Apache woman who showed them where to sit and what to do. Emily was assigned to helping prepare a hide, scraping it clean with a stone tool. Hannah joined Rebecca in sorting foods, dried meat this time, checking for any signs of spoilage. They worked through the morning, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Rebecca's back ached from the unaccustomed position, and her fingers were stained with berry juice, but there was a strange satisfaction in the work. It was useful, necessary, a way to repay even a small part of the debt they owed. At midday, they shared a meal with the women. More stew, different from the night before but equally nourishing, and fresh berries that burst with sweetness in Rebecca's mouth. The atmosphere had relaxed somewhat, the women occasionally including them. In conversations through gesture and the few English words, some of them knew. Rebecca watched her sisters, noting with relief how Emily's face had lost its deathly pallor, how Hannah's hands no longer trembled with exhaustion. They were recovering, finding strength again. But to what end? Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the edge of the camp. Warriors were returning, among them Naiche and Taza. They dismounted quickly, speaking in urgent tones to Mako, who had emerged from his wickiup at their approach. Rebecca couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the way Mako's face darkened, the way the other men's hands moved to their weapons. Something was wrong. Lozan followed her gaze, her own expression growing troubled. She spoke to the other women, who immediately began gathering children, moving them closer to the center of the camp. What's happening? Rebecca asked, fear coiling in her stomach. Lozan hesitated, then answered in her limited English. White men, coming. Rebecca's blood ran cold. White men? How many? Who? But Lozan had already turned away, organizing the other women with practiced efficiency. Rebecca hurried to Hannah and Emily, who had also noticed the disturbance. What's going on? Hannah asked, her voice tight with renewed fear. White men approaching the camp, Rebecca said, keeping her voice low. I don't know who or how many. Emily's face went pale again. Do you think? Could it be them? Frank and the others? Rebecca's jaw clenched. I don't know. But if it is, they didn't come looking for us out of remorse. Warriors took up positions around the perimeter of the camp, rifles and bows at the ready. Women and children moved to the shelter of the wickiups, though many of the women carried knives or other weapons, clearly prepared to defend their homes if necessary. Rebecca and her sisters stood uncertain, belonging to neither group. Nahiche approached them, his expression grave. "Inside," he said, gesturing to their wickiup. "Stay." Rebecca wanted to ask questions, to understand what was happening, but nature had already turned away, rejoining the other warriors. She led her sisters back to their shelter, her mind racing. If it was Frank and the others, how had they found them? And why come here, to an Apache camp, where they would be outnumbered and unwelcome? It made no sense, unless they feared what would happen if the sisters reached civilization and told their story. Men who would abandon their wives to die in the desert might not want those wives found alive, especially not by the Apache, who had reason to welcome tales of white men's cruelty. "What do we do?" Hannah whispered as they huddled inside the wickiup. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. What could they do? They were caught between two forces, neither of which they fully understood or controlled. "We wait," she finally said, "and we prepare to make a choice if it comes to that." Emily looked up, her eyes wide. What choice? Rebecca met her sister's gaze steadily. Whether to stay or go. Whether to trust those who saved us or those who left us to die. When she put it that way, it hardly seemed like a choice at all. But Rebecca knew nothing was simple in this harsh land, where survival depended on alliances and strength as much as on water and shelter. They sat in tense silence, straining to hear what was happening outside. Voices carried on the breeze. Men, speaking in English now, their tones forceful, but not yet hostile. Rebecca couldn't make out individual words, only the cadence of negotiation, of demands met with firm refusal. Then a voice cut through the others, loud and familiar enough to make Rebecca's blood freeze in her veins. "We know they're here. Our wives taken by your people while we were hunting. Return them, or there will be consequences." Frank, his voice unmistakable, carrying the same arrogant authority it always had. But now Rebecca heard it differently. Heard the hollowness behind the bluster, the lie beneath the confidence. Hannah gripped Rebecca's hand so tightly it hurt. "He's lying," she whispered, disbelief coloring her words. "After what they did, he's standing there lying." "Of course, he is," Rebecca said, a cold fury replacing her fear. "He can't admit they left us to die, not to others, maybe not even to themselves." Emily's face had gone blank, a defense against emotions too powerful to express. "So what happens now? Do we go out there? Do we tell the truth?" Rebecca considered their options. If they revealed themselves, would the Apache believe them over Frank and the others? Would it matter if they did? White men's word against white women's rarely favored the women, especially in territories where law was as sparse as water. And if they stayed hidden, what then? Would Frank and the others leave, or would they press their claim, perhaps return, with more men? Would the Apache risk conflict to protect 3 women who were not their own? Before she could decide, the wickiup's entrance darkened. Naiche stood there, his expression unreadable as he looked at the 3 sisters. "Your men," he said simply. "They say we stole you." Rebecca rose to her feet, meeting his gaze directly. "They're lying," she said, her voice firm despite the fear churning in her stomach. "They left us in the desert to die. You found us, saved us." Naiche studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I know." He gestured for them to follow him. "Now they must know that you know." Rebecca hesitated, glancing at her sisters. Hannah stood, her back straight, her expression resolute. "I'm not afraid of them anymore," she said quietly. Emily remained seated a moment longer, her hands twisting in her lap. Then she too rose, lifting her chin in a gesture that reminded Rebecca forcefully of their mother. "Let them see what they couldn't kill." Together, they followed Nietzsche out of the wickiup, into the harsh light of truth and consequence. The sun beat down mercilessly as Rebecca stepped into the clearing, flanked by her sisters. Dust swirled around their ankles, stirred by a hot wind that carried the scent of sage and tension. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her head high, her gaze fixed on the group of men standing at the edge of the Apache camp. Frank stood at the center, his hat pulled low over his eyes, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Beside him, Nathaniel shifted his weight from foot to foot, his narrow face tight with anxiety. Samuel hung back slightly, his eyes darting between Emily and the Apache warriors, who formed a protective semicircle around the camp. For a moment, no one spoke. Rebecca could feel the weight of all eyes upon them. The white men who had abandoned them, the Apache who had saved them, and everyone caught in the dangerous space between. Frank recovered first, his face twisting into a smile that never reached his eyes. "There you are," he said, as if they had merely wandered off while gathering firewood. "We've been searching everywhere. Thank God we found you." The audacity of the lie made Rebecca's breath catch in her throat. Hannah made a small sound beside her, something between a gasp and a bitter laugh. "Searching," Rebecca repeated, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Is that what you call it when you take the horses, the wagon, the supplies, and leave 3 women to die in the desert?" Frank's smile thinned. "You're confused, Becca. The heat, the fear, it's addled your mind." He turned to the Apache, particularly Marco, who stood watching with impassive dignity. "See, they're not well. We need to get them back to town, to a doctor." Nietzsche stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring at Rebecca's side. "They were dying," he said in his accented English. "No water, no food, no horses, only death waiting." Frank's face hardened. "And I suppose they told you we abandoned them? Convenient story when you're caught with stolen white women." "We weren't stolen," Hannah said, her quiet voice somehow cutting through the tension. "We were discarded, left like unwanted baggage when supplies ran low." Nathaniel glared at her. "Be quiet, Hannah. These savages have filled your head with lies." Emily, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "The only lies here are yours, Sam." Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "You rode away without looking back. You chose silver over your wife's life." Samuel at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, his eyes dropping away from Emily's accusing stare. "Enough of this," Frank snapped. "We're taking our wives home. Now." "Home?" Rebecca laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even her. "We have no home. You made sure of that when you left us to die." Frank's hand tightened on his pistol. "I won't ask again. Come here, Rebecca." Mako spoke then, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "These women came to us near death. They have found life here. They will choose their own path." "Choose?" Frank's face darkened with rage. "They're our wives. They don't get to choose." "And yet," Rebecca said quietly, "we are choosing." She felt, rather than saw, her sisters move closer to her, a united front against the men who had betrayed them so completely. In that moment, something shifted within Rebecca, fear giving way to a clarity she had never known. These men had no power over them anymore. They had already done their worst, and yet here the sisters stood, alive and stronger than before. "We're not going with you," she said firmly. "Any of you." Frank's face contorted with fury. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll be back with the cavalry. We'll see how your Apache friends fare against the United States Army." "The army," Nietzsche said coldly, "knows we are at peace. They will not come for women who do not wish to be taken." "We'll see about that," Frank replied, but there was uncertainty beneath his bluster now. His gaze swept over the armed Apache, warriors clearly calculating the odds. "This isn't over," he repeated, taking a step backward. "It is for us," Rebecca said. For a moment, Frank looked as if he might draw his weapon, might risk everything in a final desperate attempt to reclaim what he saw as his property. But survival instinct won out. With a last venomous glare, he turned away, mounting his horse, with angry efficiency. Nathaniel followed suit, though his eyes lingered on Hannah with an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. Samuel was the last to leave, hesitating as he looked at Emily. He started, but she turned her back on him, refusing to hear whatever justification he might offer. The three men rode away, dust rising behind them as they disappeared into the desert heat. Only when they were out of sight did Rebecca's knees finally buckle, the strength that had sustained her draining away, like water into sand. Hannah caught her arm, supporting her as they made their way back toward their wickiup. Mako watched them go, his expression thoughtful. "They will return," he said to Nietzsche. "Men like that do not surrender what they believe is theirs." Nietzsche nodded, his eyes on Rebecca's retreating form. "Then we will be ready." Inside the wickiup, the sisters collapsed onto the soft hides, the enormity of what had just happened, washing over them. Emily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Hannah stared into the middle distance, her expression vacant with shock. "What have we done?" she whispered. Rebecca looked at her sisters, Emily broken by betrayal, Hannah lost in disbelief, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. "We chose to live," she said simply. "We chose not to go back to men who left us to die." "But Frank was right about one thing," Hannah said, her voice barely audible. "They will come back, and they might bring others." Rebecca had no answer for that. The threat hung in the air between them, as real and oppressive as the desert heat. They had escaped death once, only to find themselves caught in a different kind of danger, one with consequences that might reach far beyond their own lives. A shadow fell across the entrance to the wickiup. Lozan stood there, her face grave, but her eyes kind as she took in the sisters' distress. She entered carrying a small pouch and a water skin and settled beside them. "Drink," she said, offering the water first to Emily, whose tears had left tracks in the dust on her cheeks. Emily accepted it with trembling hands, taking a small sip before passing it to Hannah. Lozan opened her pouch, extracting a pinch of some powdered herb that she mixed with a small amount of water in a wooden cup. She offered this to Rebecca, pantomiming that she should drink it. Rebecca hesitated, then accepted the cup. The liquid was bitter, with an earthy undertone that coated her tongue. Almost immediately, she felt a sense of calm spreading through her limbs, easing the knot of tension in her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, handing the cup back to Lozan. The Apache woman nodded, then spoke, using a mixture of English words and gestures. "Men gone. Not safe outside. Stay here." Rebecca understood. Mako and the others were concerned that Frank might not have gone far, might be watching for an opportunity to take the sisters by force. They were being confined to the wickiup for their own protection. "We understand," she said. "Thank you for protecting us." Lozan's expression softened slightly. She reached out, briefly touching Rebecca's hand, a gesture of solidarity that transcended the barriers of language and culture. Then she was gone, leaving the sisters alone with their thoughts. Night fell, the desert cooling rapidly as darkness claimed the land. The sisters remained in their shelter, speaking little, each lost in her own contemplation of what the future might hold. Occasionally, Rebecca could hear movement outside, warriors passing by on patrol, the soft voices of women completing evening tasks, the distant laughter of children not yet old enough to understand the tensions that gripped the camp. Emily had cried herself to sleep, her face pressed against Hannah's shoulder. Hannah stroked her hair absently, her own eyes distant. "What happens now, Becca?" she asked quietly. Rebecca stared into the small fire at the center of the wickiup, watching the flames dance and flicker. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we'll face it together, whatever comes." Hannah was silent for a long moment. "I keep thinking about what Nate said, that these people filled our heads with lies, as if we couldn't see the truth with our own eyes." She shook her head slowly. "I was so blind for so long. We all were," Rebecca said softly. "We saw what we wanted to see. And now..." Rebecca met her sister's gaze across the fire. "Now we see clearly, no matter how painful the truth might be." They fell into silence again, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and Emily's soft, even breathing. Eventually, Hannah too succumbed to exhaustion, her head drooping as sleep claimed her. Rebecca remained awake, too restless for sleep despite her physical and emotional fatigue. Her mind turned over the events of the day, examining them from every angle like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Had they made the right choice? Was there even a right choice to be made, or merely survival in whatever form it took? A soft sound at the entrance to the wickiup drew her attention. Nietzsche stood there, his silhouette outlined against the stars. He gestured for her to join him outside. Rebecca hesitated, glancing at her sleeping sisters, then rose quietly and stepped out into the cool night air. The camp was peaceful, most of its inhabitants asleep, except for the warriors standing guard at the perimeter. Nietzsche led her to a small rise just beyond the circle of wickiups, where the view of the surrounding desert was unobstructed. He sat, indicating that she should do the same. For a while, they simply sat in silence, looking out at the vast landscape bathed in starlight. The moon hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the scrubland. "Your men," Nietzsche finally said, his voice low. "They left you to die." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca answered anyway. "Yes." "Why?" Rebecca considered the question. How could she explain the complex web of greed, cruelty, and callous disregard that had led to their abandonment? How could she make him understand the way white society viewed women, as possessions, as burdens, as disposable when convenient? "They wanted the silver more than they wanted us," she said simply. "We were an inconvenience." Nietzsche was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Among my people," he said carefully, choosing his English words with precision, "women are life-bringers, sacred. A man who harms women brings shame to himself, to his family." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. How different her life might have been if she had been born into a culture that viewed women with such respect. "Your husband," Nietzsche continued, "he will not accept defeat. He will return." "I know," Rebecca said softly. "And he may bring trouble for your people. We shouldn't stay." Nietzsche turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Where would you go?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Where indeed? They had no money, no transportation, no protection. The nearest white settlement was days away on foot, and they had no guarantee of finding help there. A woman without a husband was vulnerable in the best of circumstances. 3 women with a story like theirs would be met with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I won't bring danger to those who saved us." Nietzsche was silent again, considering. "There is a place," he said finally. "Mission San Xavier, 2 days' ride south. The Padre there, he helps those in need, even women with no men." Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "Would you take us there?" "When you are stronger," Nietzsche said with a nod. "Not yet." Rebecca wanted to protest that they were strong enough now, that they should leave immediately before Frank had time to return with reinforcements. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and she knew her sisters were in no condition for another journey so soon. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything." Nietzsche inclined his head, accepting her gratitude. Then he rose, indicating it was time to return to the camp. Rebecca followed, her mind already occupied with this new possibility, this small gleam of hope in the darkness that had engulfed them. When she returned to the wickiup, she found Hannah awake, her face tense with worry. "Where were you?" she whispered, careful not to wake Emily. "With Nietzsche," Rebecca replied, settling beside her. "He's offered to take us to a mission to the south, somewhere we might find help." Hannah's expression eased slightly. "When? When we're stronger. A few days, perhaps." Hannah nodded, relief evident in the way her shoulders relaxed. "I was afraid." She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Rebecca understood. In this strange new world they found themselves in, fear was a constant companion, lurking at the edges of every moment of peace or hope. "Try to sleep," she said, squeezing Hannah's hand. "Tomorrow is another day." This time, Rebecca too found sleep. Though her dreams were troubled, visions of Frank returning with soldiers, of fire and blood, of her sisters calling for help she couldn't provide. She woke before dawn, her heart racing, to find the wickiup filled with soft grey light. Emily and Hannah still slept, their faces peaceful in the early morning stillness. Rebecca rose quietly, slipping outside to find the camp already stirring. Women moved about, rekindling fires, preparing food for the day ahead. Warriors returned from night patrols or prepared to leave for morning hunts. Lawson spotted her and approached, carrying a basket of herbs. She gestured for Rebecca to follow her to a fire where several other women worked. Without words, she showed Rebecca how to grind the herbs with a stone mortar and pestle, demonstrating the proper motion and consistency. Rebecca set to work, grateful for the task that occupied her hands and mind. The repetitive motion was soothing, allowing her thoughts to settle into a kind of meditative calm. Around her, the Apache women worked at their own tasks, occasionally speaking to each other in low voices. As the sun rose higher, Hannah and Emily emerged from the wickiup, looking rested despite the ordeal of the previous day. Lawson guided them to different tasks. Hannah to help with food preparation, Emily to assist an older woman who was weaving a basket with intricate patterns. The day passed in a rhythm of work and rest, meals shared in communal circles, brief interactions that slowly bridged the gap between cultures. Rebecca found herself watching the Apache women, learning from their efficiency and skill, their quiet strength as they went about the business of sustaining life in this harsh environment. By midday, a new tension had settled over the camp. Warriors came and went more frequently, their expressions grave as they reported to Mako. Women kept the children closer, their eyes often straying to the horizon. Rebecca couldn't understand what was being said, but she recognized the signs of a community preparing for trouble. She found Nietzsche near the edge of the camp, conferring with Taza and several other warriors. He noticed her approach and stepped away to meet her. "What's happening?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Nietzsche's face was impassive, but Rebecca had learned to read the subtle signs of tension around his eyes, in the set of his shoulders. "Your husband," he said. "He has gone to Fort Bowie. He speaks to the soldiers." A cold knot formed in Rebecca's stomach. "How do you know?" "We have eyes everywhere," Nietzsche replied simply. "The army moves slowly, but they will come." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, guilt and fear washing over her in equal measure. "This is our fault. We should leave now before we bring more trouble to your people." Nietzsche shook his head. "Not safe. Too many white men searching now. We wait until night, then we go south." "All of us?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "Some," Nietzsche clarified. "Enough to protect you on the journey. The others will remain here, lead the soldiers in the wrong direction if they come." The strategy made sense, but it didn't ease Rebecca's conscience. I never wanted to bring this to your doorstep. Naiche's expression softened slightly. You did not bring it. Men like your husband, they bring trouble wherever they go. It is not new to us. Rebecca nodded, accepting the truth of his words. When do we leave? After dark. Be ready. She returned to her sisters, who were helping with the midday meal. Drawing them aside, she explained the situation in hushed tones. So Frank went to the army, Hannah said, her face pale. What will he tell them? What do you think? Rebecca replied bitterly. That we've been kidnapped by savages that we need rescuing? Emily's hands twisted in her skirt. And they'll believe him. They always do, Rebecca said. But we'll be gone before they arrive. Naiche is taking us south tonight to the mission he spoke of. Hannah looked relieved, but Emily's expression remained troubled. And what happens when we get there? Do we just start over? As if none of this happened? Rebecca had no answer for that. The future beyond their immediate survival was a hazy, uncertain thing. One step at a time, she said instead. First, we get to safety. Then we decide what comes next. They spent the remainder of the day helping with preparations, packing food that would travel well, filling water skins, gathering the few possessions they had acquired during their stay. The Apache women worked alongside them, their movements efficient and purposeful, their faces betraying little of whatever emotions they might feel about the situation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Mako gathered the community. He spoke at length in Apache, his voice carrying authority and reassurance. When he finished, the people dispersed to their tasks with renewed focus and determination. Lozan approached the sisters, carrying 3 small pouches on leather cords. She placed one around each of their necks, her touch gentle but firm. Protection, she said, touching the pouch at Rebecca's throat. Medicine. Keep safe. Thank you, Rebecca said, deeply moved by the gesture. For everything. Lozan's weathered face softened into something almost like a smile. She pressed her palm briefly to Rebecca's cheek, then turned away, returning to her preparations without another word. As darkness fell, Naiche appeared with horses, 5 in total. He would lead, accompanied by Daklugi and Taza, with the sisters riding the remaining mounts. They would travel light and fast, using trails known only to the Apache, avoiding the main routes where soldiers or settlers might be encountered. The camp was hushed as they prepared to depart, the usual evening activities subdued. Children watched with solemn eyes as Naiche helped the sisters mount their horses. Mako stood nearby, his face impassive as he exchanged final words with Naiche. Rebecca looked back at the wiki-ups, at the people who had taken them in when they had nothing, who had shared food and shelter and knowledge without expecting anything in return. A lump formed in her throat, a complex mixture of gratitude and regret. Ready? Naiche asked, mounting his own horse with fluid grace. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting her throat. Hannah and Emily sat straight-backed on their horses, their faces pale but determined in the gathering darkness. With a final nod to Mako, Naiche led them away from the camp into the vast desert night. The stars emerged one by one, blanketing the sky with silver light that guided their path southward. The horses moved at a steady pace, their hooves muffled by the sandy soil. For hours they rode in silence, the landscape changing subtly around them, scrubland giving way to rocky terrain, then back to stretches of desert dotted with saguaro cacti that stood like sentinels in the moonlight. Rebecca lost track of time, her world narrowing to the rhythm of her horse's gait, the silhouettes of her companions against the star-strewn sky. Occasionally, Naiche would halt the group, listening intently for sounds that might indicate danger. Each time, after a few moments of tense silence, He would signal them onward, leading them deeper into territory few white people had ever seen. Near midnight, they stopped to rest the horses and drink from the water skins. Rebecca's legs ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and she could see similar discomfort in her sister's stiff movements as they dismounted. "How much farther?" she asked Nietzsche, keeping her voice low despite the vast emptiness surrounding them. "We ride through tomorrow," he replied. "Reach the mission by sunset if all is well." Emily sank down onto a rock, rubbing her calves to ease the cramping. "I never thought I'd miss that wiki up," she said with a weak smile. "It felt like home, almost." The simple statement carried the weight of all they had lost and found, all they were leaving behind and moving toward. Rebecca felt a pang of something like homesickness, not for the life they had left with their husbands, but for the brief peace they had found among the Apache. "We'll find a new home," Hannah said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Somewhere we can be free." Free. The word hung in the air like a promise, tantalizing and uncertain. What did freedom look like for three women alone in a territory where they had no rights, no protection, no standing of their own? Rebecca didn't know, but the alternative, returning to men who had left them to die, was unthinkable. They remounted and continued on, the horses picking their way carefully through increasingly rocky terrain. Taza rode ahead, scouting the path, while Daklugi brought up the rear, his experienced eyes constantly scanning for any sign of pursuit. The night deepened, then gradually began to lighten as dawn approached. Just as the first pale streaks appeared, on the eastern horizon, Nietzsche led them into a narrow canyon where a small spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a pool of clear water surrounded by unexpected greenery. "Rest," he said, dismounting and leading his horse to drink. "Few hours, then we continue." The sisters practically fell from their horses, muscles screaming in protest after the long night's ride. They drank deeply from the spring, then collapsed. In the shade of an overhanging rock, too exhausted even for conversation, Rebecca tried to stay awake, to maintain some vigilance, but her body betrayed her. She slipped into a deep sleep, dreamless and healing, only to be awakened, what felt like moments later, by Nietzsche's hand on her shoulder. "Time to go," he said quietly. The sun was already high, the day warming rapidly as they set off again. The terrain grew more varied, rocky outcroppings giving way to stretches of grassland, then rising into foothills covered with scrub oak and juniper. They saw no other travelers, following trails so faint Rebecca could barely discern them, though Nietzsche never hesitated in his direction. By late afternoon, they began to descend from the hills into a wide valley. In the distance, something white gleamed against the landscape. Buildings, Rebecca realized with a start. Human habitation, after so many days in the wilderness. "San Xavier," Nietzsche said, pointing toward the distant structures. "Mission." As they drew closer, Rebecca could make out a church with white walls and towers that reached toward the sky, surrounded by smaller buildings and cultivated fields. It was an oasis of civilization in the midst of the harsh desert, a sight so unexpected it brought tears to her eyes. Nietzsche halted the group while they were still some distance away. "We go no closer," he said. "Not safe for us near white men's places." Rebecca understood. The Apache, even those who came in peace, would not be welcomed at the mission. Their presence might even endanger the sisters if Frank had spread word of their kidnapping. "How can we ever thank you?" she asked, looking at Nietzsche and the others who had risked so much to bring them to safety. Nietzsche's expression remained stoic, but something in his eyes softened. "Live," he said simply. "Remember." Rebecca nodded, throat tight with emotion. "We will. Always." They dismounted, preparing to continue the final stretch on foot. Daklugi provided them with a small pack containing food and water for the journey. Taza, who had been distant and suspicious throughout their time with the Apache, approached Emily and handed her a small knife in a leather sheath. "Protection," he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. Emily accepted it with murmured thanks, tucking it into the belt of her dress. Finally, Naiche stepped forward, addressing Rebecca directly. "The Padre," he said, "Xavier Martinez. Tell him Naiche sends you. He knows me. He will help." "Naiche," Rebecca began, but found she had no words adequate to express what she felt. Gratitude, yes, but also a deep respect, and something more complex that she couldn't quite name. He seemed to understand, nonetheless, inclining his head in acknowledgement of all that remained unspoken between them. "Go with strength," he said. "Walk in beauty." With that, he mounted his horse, the others following suit. They watched as the sisters began walking toward the mission, then turned and rode away, disappearing into the landscape like spirits returning to the earth. Rebecca, Hannah, and Emily stood for a moment, watching them go. Then, drawing strength from each other's presence, they turned toward the white buildings shimmering in the distance, toward an uncertain future, but one of their own choosing. "Together," Rebecca said, taking her sister's hands in hers, "whatever comes next, we face it together." Hand in hand, they walked toward the mission, toward the next chapter of a story that had only just begun. The mission of San Xavier del Sol rose from the desert like a mirage, its white walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. As Rebecca, Hannah, and Emily approached, the building seemed to grow before their eyes, the twin towers reaching toward the cloudless sky, the intricate carvings above the entrance telling stories in stone. They paused at the edge of the mission. Grounds, suddenly aware of their appearance. 3 women in Apache-made buckskin dresses, their skin burned by the desert sun, their hair tangled and dusty from days of travel. Rebecca touched the medicine pouch Lozen had given her, drawing strength from the connection to the people who had saved them. "What if they turn us away?" Emily asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as they drew closer to this outpost of their own world. "They won't," Rebecca said with more confidence than she felt. "This is a place of sanctuary, and we have Naiche's name to offer." Hannah nodded, squaring her shoulders. "We've come this far. We won't turn back now." Together, they walked the final distance to the mission, passing fields where native workers tended crops under the afternoon sun. A few looked up as the sisters passed, their expressions curious but not unwelcoming. Near the mission walls, several children played, their laughter carrying on the breeze. They fell silent as they noticed the newcomers, dark eyes wide with curiosity. A young woman approached, her simple dress and modest head covering marking her as someone connected to the mission. She spoke in Spanish then, noting their lack of comprehension, switched to accented English. "You seek shelter? Are you lost?" Rebecca stepped forward. "We're looking for Father Xavier Martinez. We were told he might help us." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she took in their appearance more carefully. "Who sent you to Father Martinez?" "Naiche," Rebecca replied, "of the Apache." The name produced an immediate reaction. The woman crossed herself quickly, but not in fear. Rather, it seemed in acknowledgement of something significant. "Come," she said. "I will take you to him." She led them through a heavy wooden door into a courtyard shaded by ancient olive trees. The temperature dropped immediately in the shadow of the thick adobe walls, a blessed relief from the relentless sun. A fountain bubbled at the center of the courtyard, the sound of water almost magical after so many dry days. "Wait here," the woman said, gesturing to a stone bench beneath one of the trees. "I will find Father Martinez." The sisters sank onto the bench, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from desert wilderness to this ordered, peaceful space. Rebecca dipped her hands in the fountain, splashing cool water on her face and neck, washing away some of the dust of their journey. "It's so quiet," Hannah murmured, looking around at the whitewashed walls, the carefully tended plants, the smooth stone pathways. "So civilized?" Emily suggested, a hint of her old humor returning. Rebecca nodded, though the word felt strange to her now. She had seen a different kind of civilization among the Apache, less structured perhaps, but no less dignified, no less meaningful. The mission's ordered beauty felt almost alien after the natural rhythms of the camp. Footsteps on stone drew their attention. A man approached, tall and lean, with silver threaded through his dark hair and a face weathered by sun and time. His simple black cassock contrasted sharply with the white walls around him. His eyes, dark and intelligent, moved over the three sisters with careful assessment rather than judgment. "I am Father Xavier Martinez," he said, his voice accented, but his English clear. "Maria tells me you come with Nietzsche's name on your lips. This is unusual." Rebecca rose, her sisters following suit. "My name is Rebecca Miller. These are my sisters, Hannah and Emily. Nietzsche and his people saved our lives when we were abandoned in the desert. He brought us to the edge of your mission and said you might help us." Father Martinez's expression shifted subtly. "Abandoned? By whom?" "Our husbands," Hannah said quietly. "They left us to die when supplies ran low on the journey to Silverton." The priest's face darkened. "And the Apache found you." "They saved us," Emily corrected gently. "Fed us, sheltered us, protected us when our husbands returned claiming we had been kidnapped." Father Martinez was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. "And now you seek sanctuary here." It wasn't quite a question, but Rebecca answered anyway. "We have nowhere else to go. No family in the territory, no money, no possessions beyond what we're wearing." The priest nodded slowly. "Nietzsche is known to me. We have an understanding. If he sent you here, there must be a reason beyond simple charity." His gaze sharpened. "Your husbands, they know you are alive? They seek you still?" Rebecca felt a chill despite the warm air. "They went to Fort Bowie, to the army. They told them we were kidnapped by the Apache." Understanding dawned in the priest's eyes. "Ah, so Nietzsche sent you not only for your safety, but for his people's as well. If you are here safe and well, their story of kidnapping falls apart." "Will you help us?" Hannah asked, her voice steady despite the fear Rebecca knew she must be feeling. Father Martinez studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "The mission offers sanctuary to all who seek it in good faith. You will stay with the Sisters of Charity until we can determine a more permanent arrangement. But," he added, his expression grave, "you should know that your presence here may bring complications. The army takes accusations of Apache raids very seriously, especially when white women are involved." "We'll tell them the truth," Rebecca said firmly, "that we were abandoned, not taken." The priest's smile was small and sad. "The truth is not always what men in power wish to hear, my daughter, but we will cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, you need rest, food, clean clothes." He gestured to Maria, who had been waiting quietly nearby. "Please take our guests to Sister Josephine. Tell her they are to be given every comfort and consideration." Maria nodded, gesturing for the sisters to follow her. As they moved to leave, Father Martinez spoke again. "You said Nietzsche himself brought you here." Rebecca turned back. "Yes, he, Daklugi, and Taza." The priest's expression was thoughtful. "Nietzsche does not often venture so close to white settlements. Even this mission where he is known, he must have seen something in you worth the risk." Before Rebecca could respond, he made the sign of the cross in blessing, then turned and walked back toward the church, his black cassock fluttering in the breeze. Maria led them through the mission complex to a separate building where the Sisters of Charity lived and worked. Unlike the ornate church, this structure was simple and functional, with small windows and thick walls that kept the interior cool. Sister Josephine, a robust woman with kind eyes and capable hands, received them without question once Maria explained their situation. She immediately set about organizing baths, clean clothes and food, clucking over their sunburned skin and tangled hair like a mother hen with wayward chicks. "Such a state," she murmured, as she helped Emily wash the desert dust from her hair. "But nothing that can't be mended with care and time." The sisters surrendered to her ministrations gratefully. The simple act of bathing in warm water, of donning clean cotton dresses provided by the nuns, of sitting down to a meal of fresh bread, beans, and roasted peppers at a proper table, felt like a return to a world they had nearly forgotten. Yet, Rebecca found herself touching the small medicine pouch that still hung around her neck, reluctant to remove this one connection to the people who had saved them. That night, they slept on narrow cots in a small room set aside for visitors. The sounds of the mission, bells marking the hours, sisters chanting evening prayers, the gentle rustling of the garden beyond their window, a stark contrast to the desert nights they had grown accustomed to. Rebecca lay awake long after her sisters had fallen asleep, watching moonlight pattern the simple whitewashed wall, wondering what the coming days would bring. Morning arrived with the mission bells, calling the faithful to prayer. Sister Josephine brought them breakfast and fresh water for washing, her manner brisk but kind. "Father Martinez wishes to speak with you when you've eaten," she informed them. "He sent word to Fort Bowie about your arrival. It's best to address these matters directly," he says. Rebecca felt a knot form in her stomach. Has there been a response? Sister Josephine's expression gave nothing away. Not yet. But the army works at its own pace, as God intended. She made the sign of the cross, then left them to their meal. After breakfast, Maria escorted them to Father Martinez's study, a small room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy wooden desk covered in papers. Maps of the territory hung on one wall, marked with notations Rebecca couldn't decipher. The priest sat writing, looking up as they entered. "Good morning," he said, gesturing for them to sit in the chairs arranged before his desk. "I trust you slept well?" "Yes, thank you," Rebecca answered for all of them. "Your kindness is overwhelming." Father Martinez set aside his pen. "It is not kindness, but duty. Now, I must ask you to tell me everything that happened from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how painful or difficult. If I am to help you, I need to understand precisely what occurred." For the next hour, the sisters took turns recounting their story, the journey west, the growing cruelty of their husbands, the moment they overheard the plan to abandon them, the desperate days in the desert, and finally their rescue and time with the Apache. Father Martinez listened without interruption, his expression grave but compassionate. When they finished, he was silent for several moments, his fingers steepled before him. "Your husbands committed a grave sin," he finally said. "One that could have cost you your lives. By the laws of both God and man, they should be held accountable." "Will they be?" Hannah asked, a note of bitterness in her voice. "Or will their word be taken over ours, as it always is?" The priest sighed. "The truth is, your situation is complicated by many factors. You are women alone in a territory where such a state is viewed with suspicion. You have lived among the Apache, which some will see as compromising your virtue, regardless of the circumstances. And your husbands have already shaped the narrative to their advantage, claiming kidnapping rather than admitting their own culpability. So we have no recourse," Emily said flatly. "I didn't say that," Father Martinez replied. "The law may be imperfect, but it exists. And there is always a higher justice. He leaned forward. I've sent a detailed account of your situation to both Fort Bowie and to the territorial judge in Tucson. I've also written to the bishop in Santa Fe, who has some influence with the territorial governor. These things take time, but they are steps toward establishing the truth. Rebecca felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by realism. And in the meantime, what happens when Frank and the others discover we're here? The mission is a sanctuary, Father Martinez said firmly. No one can remove you against your will, not without answering to both the church and the law. And if they try anyway, Hannah pressed, Frank isn't one to respect boundaries, sacred or otherwise. The priest's expression hardened slightly. The mission has survived Apache raids, Mexican revolutions, and American expansionism. We are not defenseless, despite our peaceful appearance. Rebecca wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Frank had abandoned them to die once. He wouldn't hesitate to use force to silence them, now that they presented a threat to his reputation and freedom. What options do we have, she asked, beyond waiting for justice that may never come? Father Martinez considered the question. There are settlements where women in your situation might find a fresh start. Santa Fe, perhaps, or even farther. North to Denver, places where your past need not define your future. He paused. But such journeys require resources, which at the moment you lack. So we're trapped, Emily said softly. Again. Not trapped, the priest corrected gently. Waiting. There is a difference. The Sisters of Charity can use your help with their work, tending the gardens, teaching the local children, assisting in the infirmary. You will earn your keep, and perhaps a little more, enough to begin building toward whatever future you choose. It wasn't the immediate solution Rebecca had hoped for, but it was better than the desperate uncertainty they had faced in the desert. Thank you, Father. We accept your offer. Father Martinez nodded, satisfied. Good. Sister Josephine will assign you duties according to your abilities, and now, if you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. The sisters rose, recognizing the dismissal. As they turned to leave, the priest spoke again. Miss Miller, he said, addressing Rebecca directly, may I ask what you carry around your neck? I noticed you touch it often. Rebecca's hand went automatically to the small leather pouch. A medicine bag, Lozan, an Apache healer, gave it to us before we left. Father Martinez's expression was unreadable. And you choose to keep it, even here among the symbols of your own faith. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. It reminds me of those who saved us when our own kind left us to die. I see no conflict in honoring that. The priest studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps you are right. God works through many hands, even those we least expect. He made the sign of the cross in blessing. Go with God, my daughters. The days at the mission fell into a pattern, a rhythm as steady and predictable as the ringing of the church bells. The sisters rose with the sun, breakfasted simply, then went to their assigned duties. Hannah, with her gentle patience, worked with the young children in the mission school, teaching them English and basic arithmetic. Emily, whose nimble fingers had always been skilled at needlework, joined the nuns who sewed clothing and linens, her spirits lifting as she created beautiful things from simple materials. Rebecca found herself drawn to the gardens, where her practical nature and strong back were valuable assets. Under the guidance of Brother Miguel, a lay brother with calloused hands and encyclopedic knowledge of desert plants, she learned to tend the vegetables and herbs that sustained the mission. Community. The work was hard, but satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. Here, her efforts produced tangible results: food on the table, beauty in carefully tended flowers, order coaxed from the chaotic abundance of nature. In the evenings, they would gather with the mission community for the evening meal, then spend quiet hours sewing, reading from the mission's small library, or simply talking with the sisters whose lives might be cloistered but whose understanding of the world was surprisingly broad. Some nights, when the air was cool and the stars spread like diamonds across the desert sky, Rebecca would walk in the mission garden, thinking of Nietzsche and his people, wondering where they were, if they were safe. 2 weeks passed in this manner, peaceful and productive. Rebecca began to hope that perhaps Frank and the others had given up their search, had accepted whatever story the army had chosen to believe, and moved on with their lives. She should have known better. The riders arrived just after midday, a cloud of dust announcing their approach long before they reached the mission gates. Rebecca was working in the garden when Brother Miguel straightened suddenly, shading his eyes against the sun as he looked toward the road. "Soldiers," he said, his voice tight with concern. "And others." Rebecca's hands stilled, her heart racing as she scanned the approaching riders. Even at this distance, she could make out the distinctive blue uniforms of the cavalry. Perhaps a half-dozen soldiers. But it was the 3 men riding alongside them that made her blood run cold. Frank, Nathaniel, and Samuel come to reclaim what they believed was theirs. "I need to warn my sisters," she said, already moving toward the mission buildings. Brother Miguel nodded, his expression grim. "I will tell Father Martinez. Go quickly." Rebecca ran through the garden, her skirts gathered in one hand, dirt still clinging to her fingers. She found Hannah in the schoolroom, helping a young girl form letters on a slate. "They're here," Rebecca said simply. "Frank and the others with soldiers." Hannah's face drained of color, but she kept her composure, instructing the children to continue their work before stepping outside with Rebecca. "Emily?" she asked. "I'm going to find her now. We need to get to Father Martinez's study." They found Emily in the sewing room, her face registering shock and fear as they quickly explained the situation. Together, the 3 sisters hurried across the courtyard toward the main mission building, where they found Father Martinez already waiting for them, his expression grave. "Go to my study," he instructed. "I will meet with them in the front." "Courtyard. Remember, you are under the protection of the church. They cannot take you against your will." Rebecca wanted to believe him, but she had seen enough of the world to know that power often trumped principle, that men with guns rarely respected boundaries set by men with books. From the window of Father Martinez's study, they watched as the riders entered the mission courtyard. Captain Elliot, whom they recognized from their brief encounter upon arriving at the mission, dismounted first, followed by Frank and the others. The soldiers remained on horseback, forming a loose perimeter around the courtyard. Father Martinez stepped forward to greet them, his manner polite but reserved. They couldn't hear the conversation from their vantage point, but the body language told a clear story. The captain formal but deferential to the priest's position, Frank increasingly agitated, gesturing emphatically toward the mission buildings. "What do you think they're saying?" Emily whispered, her fingers gripping the windowsill so tightly her knuckles were white. "Nothing good," Hannah replied. "Look at Frank's face. He's furious." Rebecca watched as Father Martinez responded to whatever demands were being made, his posture remaining calm but firm. Frank's face flushed with anger, and he took a step toward the priest that made several of the soldiers tense in their saddles. The confrontation continued for several minutes, voices occasionally rising enough that fragments reached the sisters. "My wife," from Frank. "Sanctuary," from Father Martinez. "Military authority," from the captain. Finally, Father Martinez turned and gestured toward the main building, his expression resigned but determined. "He's bringing them here," Rebecca said, stepping back from the window. "We need to be ready." Hannah straightened her dress with trembling hands. Ready for what? To be dragged away? No, Rebecca said firmly. Ready to stand our ground. To speak the truth, no matter the consequence. Emily moved to stand beside her. Together, right? Whatever happens. Rebecca took her sister's hands, drawing strength from their presence. Together, always. The door opened and Father Martinez entered, followed by Captain Elliot, Frank, Nathaniel, and Samuel. The sisters stood shoulder to shoulder, facing them with as much dignity as they could muster. Frank's eyes locked on Rebecca immediately, his expression a mixture of rage and triumph. "There you are," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Time to come home, Becca." "This is not the homecoming you imagined, I fear," Father Martinez said quietly, moving to stand beside the sisters. "Your wives have sought sanctuary here. They have told me their story, how you abandoned them in the desert, left them to die, then fabricated a tale of kidnapping when you discovered they had survived." Captain Elliot glanced sharply at Frank. "Is this true, Mr. Miller? You told me the Apache raided your camp and took the women." Frank's smile was cold. "Of course that's not true. The Padre here has been misled. These women have been through a terrible ordeal, captured by savages, held against their will. It's affected their minds. They need to come home, where they can be properly cared for." "We were not captured," Rebecca said, her voice steady, despite the fury coursing through her. "We were abandoned. You took the horses, the wagon, all the supplies, and left us to die in the desert when food ran low." "That's a lie," Nathaniel snapped, his thin face flushed with anger. "Hannah, tell them the truth." Hannah's voice was quiet, but clear. "I am telling the truth. You left us to die. If the Apache hadn't found us, we would be bones in the desert now." Samuel at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, his eyes unable to meet Emily's accusing stare. Please, this has gone far enough. It's time to come home." "Home?" Emily laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "We have no home with men who would sacrifice our lives for their convenience." Captain Elliot looked increasingly uncomfortable, his gaze moving between the sisters and their husbands. "This is a serious accusation, Mr. Miller. Abandonment with intent to cause death would be a criminal matter." Frank's face hardened. "It's her word against mine, Captain. And I'm afraid my wife is not in her right mind after her ordeal with the savages. Who knows what they did to her, what they put in her head." "They saved us," Rebecca said, her voice rising with indignation. "Fed us, clothed us, treated us with more respect than our own husbands ever did. They risked their lives to bring us here to safety. You see," Frank said to the captain, "defending the very people who took her. If that's not evidence of a mind led astray, I don't know what is." Captain Elliot rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "It's a complicated situation, to be sure. But Mr. Miller, the fact remains that your wife and her sisters have sought sanctuary in the mission. I have no authority to remove them by force, regardless of the circumstances." Frank's expression darkened. "She's my wife. Under the law, she's my property. I have every right to take her home." "A wife is not property, Mr. Miller," Father Martinez interjected, his voice firm. "She is a person under the eyes of both God and the law. And while the law may grant you certain rights as a husband, it does not grant you the right to remove someone from church sanctuary by force." "This is absurd," Frank snarled. "Captain, surely you're not going to let some priest interfere with a man's right to his own wife." Captain Elliot straightened, his military bearing asserting itself. "I respect the sanctity of the church, Mr. Miller, as does the United States Army. I cannot and will not use military force to remove these women against their will." Frank turned to Nathaniel and Samuel, his face flushed with rage. "Are you hearing this? They're letting our wives stay here after everything we've done to find them." "Everything you've done?" Rebecca repeated incredulously. "You mean like abandoning us in the desert? or lying to the army about being raided, or coming here now trying to force us to return to men who left us to die. For a moment it seemed Frank might lunge at her, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. But Captain Elliot stepped forward, a subtle reminder of his authority. "Mr. Miller, I suggest you take some time to consider your position. If what these women say is true, you could face serious charges. Abandonment, attempted murder, filing false reports with the military, these are not minor offenses." Frank's face contorted with fury, but he controlled himself with visible effort. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not by a long shot." "For now it is," Father Martinez replied calmly. "I think it's best if you gentlemen leave the mission grounds. You're welcome to return when cooler heads prevail." For a tense moment, it seemed Frank might refuse. Then, with a final venomous glare at Rebecca, he turned and stalked from the room, Nathaniel following closely behind. Samuel lingered, looking at Emily with an expression that might almost have been regret. He began, but she turned away, refusing to meet his gaze. "Go, Samuel," she said softly. "There's nothing left to say." He hesitated, then nodded, and followed the others out. Captain Elliot remained, his expression troubled. "Ladies," he said, addressing all three sisters, "I want you to know that I take your accusations very seriously. I'll be conducting a thorough investigation into what happened out there." "Thank you, Captain," Rebecca replied, relieved that at least someone in authority seemed willing to... "Listen, don't thank me yet," he warned. "These investigations take time, and the outcome is never certain. In the meantime, I would advise you to remain within the mission grounds. Your husbands may have left for now, but men like that rarely give up easily." With a respectful nod to Father Martinez, he departed, leaving the sisters alone with the priest. "That went better than I feared," Father Martinez admitted, sinking into the chair behind his desk. "But Captain Elliot is right. This is far from over." Rebecca felt suddenly exhausted, the confrontation draining her of the strength that had sustained her. "What happens now?" "Now," the priest said, "we wait for the captain's investigation to proceed, and we pray that justice will prevail." "And if it doesn't?" Hannah asked, her voice small. Father Martinez's expression was grave but determined. "Then we find another way. The church has resources beyond what you might imagine, connections that reach to places your husbands cannot follow." Rebecca thought of Nietzsche and his people, who had risked their own safety to bring them to this place of refuge. She thought of the kindness they had shown, the strength they had demonstrated in the face of generations of injustice. If they could survive and maintain their dignity in a world determined to destroy them, surely 3 women could find a way to claim their freedom. "We'll be all right," she said, as much to convince herself as her sisters. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they left Father Martinez's study, stepping into the sunlit courtyard where birds sang in the olive trees and children played near the fountain, Rebecca felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The danger had not passed. It might never fully pass, but they were alive, they were together, and for the first time since leaving their childhood home, they were beginning to understand what true freedom might look like. The sisters returned to their duties, though their minds were understandably distracted by the confrontation. That evening, as they sat with Sister Josephine and several other nuns, mending linens by lamplight, the older woman broke the contemplative silence. "You showed great courage today," she said, her needle moving steadily through the fabric, standing before those men, speaking your truth without wavering. "It didn't feel like courage," Hannah admitted. "It felt like fear, just fear. That didn't paralyze me for once." Sister Josephine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That is often what courage looks like. Fear that we move through rather than fear that stops us." She tied off her thread and reached for another piece of mending. When I was young, before I took my vows, I faced a choice not unlike yours, a husband who saw me as property, a family who expected obedience above all else. The church offered me another path. Emily looked up from her sewing, surprised. You were married. Briefly, Sister Josephine confirmed, until I found the strength to seek another life. It was not easy, but I have never regretted my choice. Rebecca considered, the nun with new eyes, seeing beyond the habit and stern exterior to the woman who had made difficult choices of her own. How did you know it was the right path? Sister Josephine smiled, the expression softening her weathered face. I didn't. Not with certainty. I only knew that the path I was on was wrong for me, and that I had to find another way forward, whatever the cost. She set aside her mending, looking at each sister in turn. The future is never clear, my dears. We can only make the best choices we can with the information we have, and trust that God will guide our steps. It was a simple truth, but one that resonated with Rebecca. They couldn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Frank would return with more men, whether the army's investigation would vindicate them, whether they would find a place in this harsh territory or need to journey elsewhere. But they could make choices today, small steps toward whatever future awaited them. As the days passed, they settled back into the rhythm of mission life, though now there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't existed before. Father Martinez arranged for one of the mission's indigenous workers, a man named Joaquin, who had served in the army as a scout, to teach them to shoot the old rifle kept in the mission storehouse. I pray you never need this knowledge, the priest said, as Joaquin patiently showed them how to load, aim, and fire the weapon. But in this territory it is better to be prepared. Rebecca took to the lessons with grim determination, her mind flashing to Nietzsche and the bow he had taught her to use. Different tools, same purpose, survival in a land that forgave no weakness. Hannah and Emily followed her lead, their initial reluctance giving way to focused practice as they recognized the necessity of being able to defend themselves. A month passed without word from either Frank or Captain Elliot. The sisters began to hope that perhaps their husbands had given up, had moved on to Silverton or some other mining town to pursue the wealth that had driven them west in the first place. Rebecca knew better than to believe it completely. Men like Frank didn't surrender what they considered theirs, not without a fight. But she allowed herself to imagine a future where they might truly be free. That future became more tangible when Father Martinez called them to his study one afternoon, his expression more relaxed than they had seen it since their arrival. I've received a letter from the bishop in Santa Fe, he announced as they settled into the chairs before his desk. He has taken an interest in your situation and offers a possible solution. Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest. What kind of solution? There is a convent in Santa Fe that operates a small hospital and school. They are in need of capable women to assist with their work. The bishop suggests that you might find a place there, far from the reach of your husbands and with the full protection of the church. Hannah leaned forward, her expression cautiously optimistic. We wouldn't need to become nuns ourselves. Father Martinez smiled slightly. No, unless that is your calling. You would be lay workers, compensated for your labor and free to build new lives in the city under the convent's protection until such time as your legal situation is resolved. Emily glanced at her sisters, a spark of excitement in her eyes. Santa Fe is a real city with shops and theaters and society. We could have a fresh start there. When would we leave? Rebecca asked, practical as always. There is a supply wagon traveling north next week with 2 of our brothers as escort. It's not a comfortable journey, but it's safe and direct. Father Martinez's expression grew serious. I would advise accepting the bishop's offer. Your husbands may have retreated for now, but men of their nature rarely abandon their claims entirely." Rebecca nodded, thinking of the rifle lessons, of the tension that still lingered despite the peaceful routine they had established. "We'll go," she said, looking to her sisters for confirmation. They nodded in agreement. "Good," Father Martinez said with evident relief. "I'll write to the bishop immediately to confirm your acceptance. In the meantime, continue your duties here as before. The less disruption to the routine, the less likely anyone will notice preparations for your departure." As they left the study, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Santa Fe represented something she had barely dared to hope for, a true new beginning, far from the shadows of their past, in a place where they might build lives of their own choosing. That night, as she stood in the mission garden, looking up at the star-strewn sky, she found herself thinking of Nietzsche again. She wondered if he would approve of their decision, if he would understand their choice to journey north rather than remain in the territory he called home. She liked to think he would, that he would recognize in their decision the same fierce determination to survive, to remain free, that drove his own people. She touched the medicine pouch that still hung around her neck, a tangible connection to the people who had saved them when all seemed lost. Whatever the future held in Santa Fe or beyond, she would carry that connection with her, a reminder of the strength she had found in the desert, of the choices that had led her to this moment of possibility. The stars burned overhead, endless and eternal, witnesses to a journey that had begun in betrayal but might yet end in something like redemption. Rebecca smiled up at them, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come and how far they had yet to go. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new steps toward whatever awaited them. But tonight, under the desert stars, it was enough to know that they had survived, that they had chosen their own path, and that together they would find their way forward, one step at a time. The morning of their departure arrived with a sky washed clean by a rare desert rain, the air sweet with the scent of damp earth and sage. Rebecca stood in the doorway of their small room, surveying the few possessions they had accumulated during their stay at the mission, the simple dresses sewn by Emily's careful hands, the books Father Martinez had given them from the mission's library, the small wooden carvings of saints that Sister Josephine had pressed upon them as tokens of protection. Hannah finished rolling their spare clothes into neat bundles, securing them with twine. "It feels strange to be leaving," she said softly. "After everything, this place became a kind of home." Emily nodded, carefully wrapping a small clay pot she had received from one of the mission children. But Santa Fe, a real city, can you imagine? Proper beds, shops, maybe even a theater. Her voice held a wistful note, a hint of the young woman who had once dreamed of a life beyond the confines of their small hometown. Rebecca smiled, recognizing the stirring of hope in her sister's words. It had been absent for so long, crushed beneath the weight of Samuel's betrayal and the harsh realities of their journey. Its return, however tentative, felt like a victory. A soft knock interrupted their preparations. Sister Josephine stood in the doorway, her usually stern face softened with emotion. "The wagon is ready," she said. "Father Martinez wishes to speak with you before you depart." The sisters followed her across the mission grounds, where the daily activities continued, as always. Children in their lessons, women washing clothes at the communal trough, men tending to the endless tasks of maintenance and cultivation. Yet, there was a tension beneath the ordinary rhythm, a watchfulness in the men stationed at the gates and along the walls. Father Martinez waited in his study, standing as they entered. On his desk lay 3 leather pouches. "Your wages," he explained, "for the work you've done here. It's not much, but it will help you establish yourselves in Santa Fe." Rebecca accepted the pouches with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. They had worked hard, yes, but had never expected payment beyond the shelter and food provided by the mission. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." The priest nodded, his expression grave. "There is one more matter we must discuss before you leave." He moved to a cabinet against the wall, unlocking it with a key kept on a chain around his neck. From it, he withdrew a wooden box. "This arrived yesterday from Fort Bowie," he said, placing the box on his desk. "Captain Elliot sent it with his compliments and a message I think you'll want to hear." He opened the box, revealing 3 identical documents bearing official seals. "These are divorce decrees signed by the territorial judge in Tucson. Based on Captain Elliot's investigation and the testimony of several witnesses, the court has granted you complete legal separation from your husbands on grounds of abandonment and cruelty." Hannah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Emily stared at the documents in disbelief. Rebecca felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, the implications too enormous to absorb immediately. Is this real?" she managed to ask. "Father." Martinez smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. "Completely legal and binding. You are free women beholden to no one." "How?" Emily whispered. "Frank would never have agreed." "He didn't," the priest confirmed, his smile taking on a grimly satisfied edge. "But it seems your husbands had more to hide than just their treatment of you. Captain Elliot's investigation revealed they had been involved in illegal trading with certain disreputable elements along the border. When faced with those charges or accepting the divorce, they chose the latter." Rebecca couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Freedom, true, legal freedom, had seemed an impossible dream. Now it lay before them in black and white, sealed, and signed by the territorial authorities. "There's more," Father Martinez continued. "The court also awarded you a portion of any mining claims your husbands might establish as compensation for their actions. It may come to nothing if their venture fails, but if they do strike silver—" "We don't want their money," Hannah said firmly. "Perhaps not," the priest acknowledged, "but justice demands restitution. Think of it not as their money, but as what is rightfully yours for the suffering they caused." Rebecca picked up one of the documents, running her fingers over the official seal. "So we truly are free to go where we choose, to build new lives." "Yes," Father Martinez confirmed, "though I would still advise caution. Legal documents don't always restrain men like your former husbands. Santa Fe remains your safest option, at least for now." The sisters exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication born from shared hardship and endurance. Then Rebecca carefully gathered the documents, tucking them securely into her dress pocket. "We're ready," she said simply. Outside, the supply wagon waited, loaded with provisions for the journey north, sacks of grain and beans, barrels of preserved fruits, crates of candles and soap that the mission produced for trade. Brother Thomas and Brother Miguel sat at the front, reins in hand, rifles within easy reach. 2 additional men on horseback would accompany them as escort, indigenous converts who had served as scouts for the army and knew the territory intimately. The mission community had gathered to bid them farewell. Sister Josephine and the other nuns, the children from the school, the workers who had shared meals and stories with them during their stay. There were gifts pressed into their hands, small tokens of remembrance, blessings murmured in Spanish and native tongues, embraces that conveyed what words could not. As Rebecca climbed onto the wagon, settling on a bench cushioned with blankets, she felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude for the sanctuary the mission had provided, anticipation for what lay ahead, and a bittersweet sadness at leaving behind those who had helped them when they had nothing. Father Martinez approached, making the sign of the cross in blessing. "Go with God," he said. "And remember, you will always have a place here should you need it." The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking as the oxen strained against their yokes. Emily looked back, waving to the children who ran alongside for a short distance, calling out farewells. Hannah sat with her hands folded in her lap, her expression contemplative as she watched the mission recede behind them. Rebecca faced forward, her eyes on the horizon where their future awaited. The road to Santa Fe would be long and not without dangers, but they faced it now as free women, masters of their own destiny for perhaps the first time in their lives. They traveled north through country that grew increasingly verdant as they left the desert behind. The wagon followed established trails, stopping at small settlements or military outposts where their mission credentials ensured them safe passage and occasional shelter. Brother Thomas and Brother Miguel were experienced travelers, familiar with the route and its challenges, while their indigenous escorts scouted ahead, ensuring their path remained clear of danger. Rebecca found herself enjoying the journey despite its hardships. There was something liberating about movement, about watching the landscape change day by day. Desert giving way to grassland, dry washes becoming flowing streams, distant mountains drawing ever closer. At night, as they sat around the campfire, listening to Brother Miguel's stories or Brother Thomas's quiet prayers, she felt a peace she had rarely known, a sense that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Hannah seemed to blossom during the journey, her quiet strength finding expression in practical ways, tending to minor injuries, helping prepare meals, offering comfort to a homesick young soldier at one of the outposts they visited. Emily's natural vivacity returned gradually, her laughter becoming more frequent, her curiosity about their surroundings more evident with each passing day. They were a week into their journey, camped near a small stream with cottonwood trees providing welcome shade when one of their escorts returned from scouting with news that made Rebecca's heart race. "Riders approaching from the south," he reported to Brother Thomas. "3 men moving fast." Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances with her sisters. 3 men. It couldn't be coincidence. Brother Thomas's expression hardened as he reached for your rifle. How far? Less than an hour, the way they're pushing their horses. Brother Miguel moved quickly to the wagon, extracting a small brass spyglass. "We'll see who they are before we decide what to do," he said, his normally gentle voice firm with resolve. They waited in tense silence as Brother Miguel climbed a nearby hill, glass trained on the southern horizon. Rebecca found her hand straying to the small knife she now kept in her belt, a poor weapon against firearms, but better than nothing. Hannah stood close beside her, while Emily scrambled into the wagon, emerging with the old rifle they had been taught to use at the mission. Brother Miguel returned, his expression grim. "It's them," he confirmed. "Your husbands, former husbands," he corrected himself. "They look like they've ridden hard for days." Rebecca felt ice form in her veins. How did they find us? How did they even know we'd left the mission? "It matters little now," Brother Thomas said, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. "What matters is what we do next." He turned to the sisters. "The decision is yours. We can try to outrun them, though the wagon will slow us down. We can stand and confront them with what force we have. Or we can try to hide, get you off the trail while we delay them." Rebecca considered their options, weighing risks and possibilities. With the clarity that had become her hallmark since their abandonment in the desert, "We won't run," she decided, looking to her sisters for confirmation. They nodded in agreement. "And we won't hide. We have the law on our side now. Let them come." Brother Thomas nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "As you wish, but we'll be ready for whatever they intend." They arranged themselves in a defensive position, the wagon providing cover, Brother Thomas and Brother Miguel with rifles at the ready, the 2 escorts positioned as flanking protection. Rebecca, Hannah, and Emily stood together in the center, the divorce decrees in Rebecca's hand like a shield. The riders appeared on the horizon, 3 dust-covered figures pushing their horses to the limit. As they drew closer, Rebecca could make out their features, Frank in the lead, his face set in familiar lines of determination and rage. Nathaniel and Samuel following close behind. They pulled up short about 30 yards from the camp, clearly surprised by the reception awaiting them. Frank's eyes narrowed as he took in the armed men positioned defensively around the sisters. "Rebecca!" he called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to say to each other, Frank," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The law has spoken. We're divorced, free of you all." Frank's face darkened with anger. "That's horseshit and you know it. Some trumped-up charges, a corrupt judge. That's not justice." "And abandoning 3 women in the desert was?" Hannah retorted, her quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. "You left us to die, Nate. There's no coming back from that." Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, glancing at Frank as if seeking direction. Samuel remained silent, his eyes fixed on Emily, who stared back with unwavering resolve. "You're my wife," Frank insisted, addressing Rebecca again. "Paper or no paper, that doesn't change." "It does in the eyes of the law," Brother Thomas interjected, his rifle held casually but visibly across his lap. "And in the eyes of the church. These women are under our protection now by order of the bishop himself." Frank spat into the dust. "I don't give a damn about your bishop or your protection." His hand moved toward the pistol at his hip, a motion so familiar it made Rebecca's breath catch. "I wouldn't," Brother Miguel warned, raising his rifle slightly. "There are 5 of us and 3 of you. Those aren't odds I'd take even in a fair fight." Frank hesitated, clearly calculating his chances. Rebecca knew that look, had seen it countless times when he was weighing risk against reward, determining whether violence would achieve his goals. "Frank," Samuel said suddenly, his voice low but clear in the tense silence, "it's over. Let it go." Frank turned on him, incredulous. "Let it go? After they humiliated us, had us branded as criminals, took what was rightfully ours?" "We left them to die," Samuel replied, a hint of shame coloring his words. "There's no justifying that. Not to anyone, not even to ourselves." Nathaniel nodded slowly, not meeting Hannah's steady gaze. "He's right, Frank. We did wrong by them, whatever came after. We earned it." Frank stared at his companions in disbelief, then back at the sisters standing united before him. Something shifted in his expression. Not remorse, Rebecca knew him too well to expect that, but perhaps recognition. Recognition that some things, once broken, could never be mended. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow, a reflexive protest rather than a genuine promise. "It is," Rebecca replied simply. "It has been since the moment you decided our lives were worth less than your ambitions." For a long moment, Frank held her gaze, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions, rage, wounded pride, and perhaps, in some small measure, understanding. Then he yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply. "Come on," he barked to the others. "We're wasting time here." Nathaniel followed immediately, not looking back. Samuel lingered a moment longer, his eyes on Emily. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for whatever that's worth." Emily's expression didn't soften, but she gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. It was more than he deserved, and they both knew it. With that, he turned his horse and followed the others, the 3 riders soon disappearing. Over the horizon from which they had come, the silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Rebecca let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, feeling the tension drain from her body like water from a broken vessel. "Do you think they'll come back?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Brother Thomas shook, his head lowering his rifle. "Not those 2, he said, referring to Nathaniel and Samuel. "They've made their peace with it, whatever that's worth. As for the other one," he shrugged. "Hard to say. Men like that, with pride as their compass, they can be unpredictable. We'll keep watch tonight just to be safe, Brother Miguel added, his kind eyes reassuring. But I think your path forward is clear now. Rebecca nodded, folding the divorce papers and returning them carefully to her pocket. Their path forward, to Santa Fe, to whatever new life awaited them there. It would not be easy, she knew. 3. Women alone, even with legal freedom, would face challenges in a society that viewed independence with suspicion. But they had survived abandonment, desert, and danger. They had found strength they never knew they possessed, courage that had been buried beneath years of submission. That night, as they sat around the campfire listening to Brother Thomas read from his well-worn Bible, Rebecca found her thoughts turning not to the confrontation earlier that day, but to the people who had made their journey possible. Nisha and his warriors who had found them dying in the desert, Lawson who had tended their wounds and given them medicine for protection, Father Martinez who had offered sanctuary when they had nowhere else to turn. She touched the small medicine pouch that still hung around her neck, a connection to those who had saved them when all seemed lost. Their journey had begun in betrayal and nearly ended in death, but it had brought them here, to this moment of true freedom, to the threshold of a new beginning. As the fire burned low and stars emerged overhead, Rebecca looked at her sisters, Hannah's face peaceful in the flickering light, Emily's eyes bright with renewed hope, and knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for having been broken, wiser for having survived. The journey continued northward, each day bringing them closer to Santa Fe and the new life that awaited them there. Rebecca didn't know what that life would hold, what joys or sorrows, what triumphs or setbacks, but for the first time, the future belonged to them alone, to shape as they chose with the strength they had found in the desert and carried within them always. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.